Good morning, good morning. This is Craig Paris. And if you hear the sultry sounds of my smooth and melodious voice, it is indeed a good morning. It means that you've made it through another week. You're listening to In Touch News Radio, reality radio, where everybody can be a star. And again, my name is Clinton Paris. I am the co-host of Straight Up the Middle. And if you're like me, you spend a week just saying, what is going on? So many things have happened. So much stuff is going on. It's hard to keep up with it. But guess what? If you're listening to this show, you're in the right place because we're going to nail down all the things that you need to be thinking about. And better than that, we're even going to tell you what you should be thinking about it, at least from a Democratic perspective. I know my co-host has a different opinion. He's going to tell you what maybe some other folks think, but I'm always right. So really, you want to listen to me. But I welcome you all to the show this morning. It is always a great opportunity for discourse and exchange to be live on In Touch News. And I want to encourage everybody. In Touch News is a total media suite, a place where you can go and get all kinds of information, entertainment, activities, events. And they have a week long lineup of various shows on various topics from finance to relationships to religion to local politics. Our show, we talk about national politics, but I want to encourage everybody who is listening to this show to log into the In Touch News page at intouchnews.com. Take a look at all the opportunities there are on the page for you to get information. Media and information is really the new power. It's really not money. Information is power. And I'll just say this. Back during slavery, the reason they didn't want slaves to learn to read and write was information. And you have it right at your disposal on your phone, on your computer. You can log into InTouch News anytime from anywhere and check out all the information that's available on the page. So I encourage you all. I know you tune in to listen to the great, wonderful discussions I have with my co-host on Saturday morning. But there's so much more that InTouch News offers, and I want to encourage everyone to take the time to log into the station, look at all the things on the webpage that's available for you at intouchnews.com. Okay, there's my commercial for InTouch News. Now, I can't do this by myself because listen, if you leave me alone, there's no way I can go down the middle. I'm going to veer off to the left and end up in a ditch somewhere because I lean to the left. I'm a Democrat. I'm very liberal, and I'm very open-minded about how I approach and look at issues. So guess what? So that there's even a chance that we may not go too far left, I have with me none other than the great co-host of all time, Mr. Pete Edwards. Good morning, Pete. How you doing this morning?
Good morning, my brother, and I just want to let you know that you're second only to me with that melodious voice. But you know you're good with it, my brother. Clint, I tell you, man, I'm glad we want our listeners to know internationally, and because we do have people, military people I know that pick up In Touch radio
Yeah.
overseas, and we're getting following among more OGs who you see. Here's my thing, and it's a conservative thing. Just because you get older, it doesn't make you means that you have to be slower. If you want to enjoy life as you get older, you got to think young. Sometimes you gotta, and sometimes you can think liberal and all too, but just don't overdo it. From my standpoint, but we want our listeners to tell other people we can't grow unless we expand our knowledge, and how you expand knowledge, you get more people to pay attention to, like In Touch News and things like that, because we have an array of age groups that listen, participate in the programming that we have, and things like that. And of course, the various opinions. The black community is not monolithic as we always try to act like or people claim us to be. So I want that understood. But today, one of the things, I know we're going to get into some real heavy stuff, but I'm thinking about the people who in that collapsed building in Miami.
Yes.
So our prayers, I mean, if it's like the one in New Orleans that they were building a new hotel or something right by the Superdome or what have you, Clint, that building stayed crushed and they didn't even get people from underneath that rubble for doggone a whole year. And
Oh,
so,
good.
yeah, so it's going to be the same thing. I could tell the listening audience and looking at some of the news articles and people on commentary, it may be 6 months before they pull all the bodies out because of the fragility of the hotel, the condo. And if you saw the independent film on it, the way it collapsed and even shook another building. Now, I will say this: that's one thing that Democrats have over Republicans, and it's a sad time to admit it, but let the truth be told. Republican administrations give contractors, and they don't take it. They don't. We give them a pass in doing building inspections and all like that. We do because we're pro business, so we just give them a pass. And it's obvious when you look at some of the complaints they had against this building, and the way some of the things been going with, you can only inspect it 40 years later. No, we need to change that. So I'm saying to my Republican brethren in the legislature, stop making it. This is people that suffer because of inexcusable actions of government not inspecting the building on a regular basis, ignoring people who complain about water damage and all before they found out that somebody sued in 2015. Then another case, the judge just blew off. And the way we've appointed some of the judges coming up, Clint, you can bet that even if we have more tragedies like this one, some of these judges are so warped in their thinking and so extremely right-wing that lay people and consumers aren't going to be treated right, even if you got deficiencies and defaults. And it should be some criminal negligence come out of this, but I doubt it because the way the system is set up, it's not going to happen. Now, if it was a Democratic administration and all on a regular basis that normally looks at consumer affairs better than we as Republicans do, might be a different story. So that's my take on that. But let's pray for them because I found out that the demographics of people living in that building, Jewish, Puerto Rican, black, white, young, old, it's amazing. But it's America. So we lose one, it's like losing a kinfolk. You know what I'm saying? So there you have it.
Absolutely. Yeah. No, you're absolutely right. I mean, the first thing is the humanity of watching something of that nature happen, and the fear that people lived in. And I'm going to use a personal experience. My mother lived in a high rise before she passed away, and it was 11 floors, and they had a fire once, and in the middle of the night, and she had to be evacuated, and they literally had to set up stations on the stairwell to help those seniors out the building. They were, they had older people. And, once that experience happened, she said, okay, I'm living on the first floor from now on because I'm not getting stuck at the top of a building. I can't walk down that many stairs and all this kind of stuff. But I remember her fear of being in that building after that, just the fear that something had happened in the middle of the night. And there's little I can do about it. I did some disaster relief work in my younger days, Pete, and it's amazing how quickly something can become, a pile of rubble. And you're right about the way that we look now on that inspection piece. I have this theory, and I'm working it up, and I'm bringing it out more and more public about what happens in America, and it's really tied to capitalism. And I say capitalism has no conscience. And so when it comes time to make money, that drives how we go about resolving or how we go about dealing with a lot of issues. And unfortunately for Republicans, they have fallen on the side of putting money oftentimes in front of really the ultimate concern for the people. And they'll leave it to the market to resolve the issue. If it's not quality, for example, in this situation, an engineer back in 2018 came out and said, hey, this building has a faulty design from the get-go. And that's because there's a slope that's not, there's no drainage slope at the bottom or something along those lines, he said. Mm-hmm. And so you get water intrusion into the slab. And that was done in 2018. But nothing was done about it. You're right about that. It's going to be, and people oftentimes don't like the fire department coming, checking for fire extinguishers or exit doors having to be unlocked, and a
Mm.
lot of things that go into keeping people safe because these things happen so rare. But it is definitely a time to pray for these
Oh
people,
yeah.
to pray for their families, Pete, and to let them know that listen, you're not alone in this moment. There are a number of websites set up on various stations like even Fox News and CNN had where you can go and donate. Because what's bad about this, Pete, the profiteers are already in place and going to look to capitalize on people's desire to help these folks out.
Isn't that
And
awful? That's awful.
you want to you want to make sure that if you do support, you support the legitimate agency, and that your money goes to really help those people. So
Oh yeah.
now if I could segue from that, Pete, we're talking about the collapse of the building. What about the collapse of the voting rights bill and that not getting through? I was really surprised. I thought the Republicans have been set up by the Democrats. The Republicans are going across the state legislatures under the impression that they are restricting voting rights. Democrats have created that impression that all these bills are simply oppressive in nature. They're Jim Crow 2.0. And then you have the voting bill not move forward. Have the Democrats set the Republicans up to hang this around their neck, Pete,
No.
as the
No.
reason
No.
that this thing didn't get through?
You think we worrying about somebody like Chuck Schumer? I've said over and over, even if I was an independent or even if I was a conservative Democrat, just being honest, Schumer is not, the guy is fake, okay? He's fake. So the voting thing, for an example, I hear some of my brethren, my soul brothers, talk about voter ID. We use voter ID for everything. Everything. Even when you go into one of these agencies that you send money off, Western Union, PayPal, or whatever the case may be, MoneyGram, whatever, they ask you for an ID. We go into this, we check our kids out of school. We got to have an ID. Drive a car, you got to have an ID, supposedly. So the ID piece, as I said before, it'd be one thing if you were forced to pay for it. But when you look at a lot of the bills across the country that talks about ID production, producing it, they have funds in there to pay for an ID. And a lot of people have never had a state issued ID. And so now they can get one that's paid for by the government, and then they're complaining about that. But we go everywhere with an ID. That's
They
crazy.
dropped that though. That was dropped.
Well,
That was
some
one
of
of
it, some
the
of it was
things
dropped. Yeah.
came through, and they dropped the ID objection. And I thought, well, that'll get the Republicans to jump on, to make this thing move. So they dropped that. But she was anticipating, I didn't object based on what Joe Manchin put forward. She goes, fine, I'll go along with that. I'll drop the voter ID objection that we have and see where it goes. So the voter ID piece is not really, I'm trying to, on the table. I think it's more of a federalism issue. They don't want federal rules imposed on states regarding voting. I think it's a setup, though, from where I sit.
Well, when we didn't do anything, and good people are in all parties, trust me on that, and bad ones too. When we didn't do anything, when the Supreme Court, led by John Roberts, gutted the Clarence Act, I think it was Shelby County versus somebody, whatever, and they had an opportunity to do some things about it in Congress and all. They didn't do anything. I told you before, there's a part of the Republican Party that's interested in making this country either go back to post Reconstruction or be a Nazi style America. That is true. Now, on the other hand, reason why we can sit as, I'm gonna be an honest Republican, and let's say I'm a right wing extremist. Why would I? And I'm in Congress. Why would I push anything with voting rights? You know why? Because when I look at all of the judicial appointments that Trump made, my friend Trump. Now, I'm doing this from a hypothetical point of view, but a good logical, for real thought process too, Clint. My friend Trump has put judges in place that's going to adhere to the political principle of the way the Republican Party is now. Do anybody really think that when the Justice Department is suing Georgia and then the Arizona thing and the whole bit, I can tell the listening audience right now, the type of judges that's been appointed are going to uphold whatever the Republican political party wants to do if it meets any of the philosophy with regards to the rule of law. It's a win-win. So as a Republican right-wing conservative, you think I'm worried? The Democrat Party is shooting themselves in the foot. The black community is known not to vote during off-year election. And so, and when then you look at the division among people of color, see, the Democrats are forgetting. You got, for an example, Cubans that come over. You got two different opinions with Cubans. You got the white Cubans and you got the black Cubans. When Puerto Ricans or well, not Puerto Ricans, but El Salvadorians and Nicaraguans and other people coming in from Central America, within their color scheme, the light ones favor Republicans, the darker skinned ones favor Democrats, but they don't have the money and the power. So let's be honest about it. If I'm a right-wing extremist Republican, you think I'm worried about the Justice Department going in to sue Georgia and all like that? They're going to lose them all. Now, they will probably throw out we shouldn't arrest people for being given water and all like that. But the rest of it is politics. Schumer knows it's politics. Pelosi knows it's politics. And until the black community decide to get a new coalition, we keep acting like that we cannot get white conservative Republicans, particularly low income and low middle income, to join us. If we got a good platform, then we can get a coalition together. But we keep ignoring them. And guess what? We're trying to do it by ourselves, and it ain't going to work. That's my take on it.
Pete, so as usual, I'll just say that you're wrong on everything that you just said, but that's okay. That's what this discussion is about. People having different opinions. All right, let me go to the first point. Is the whole goal of this voting rights bill was not to get it passed. It was to bait the Republicans into opposing it, so that Democrats could go back to the states and say, see, these people are really out to take your voting rights away. One of the greatest achievements and liberators in the American experience has been the achievement of voting rights in the African-American community that came out of the civil rights movement. For all of us young folks who missed the movement, Pete, we missed it. And we missed the glory days. We missed, storming the beaches of Normandy. We came in late. This is our chance now to be part of changing that history. And I think that's what that whole voting rights bill was really about. It was exactly what, they threw it out there. They knew full well the Republicans would not go for it. Their constitution emotionally wouldn't let them do it. And they did. They opposed it out across the board. We're not supporting it. We fed them Joe Manchin. Here you go, and Christian Sinema. We fed those to the Republicans. They chewed them up as well and spit their little compromise out. So now the Democrats can go back to their base and say, as a rallying point, I disagree with the fact that you're going to have these coalitions. What you have, though, is you have coalitions on certain topics. And the topic of voting rights is going to draw into it a lot more open-minded liberal people. Also, it's going to draw in independents who just won't like the tenor of the fact that you're doing all these restrictive measures across states. And at the same time, you're unwilling to put in federal rules that'll give everybody some standard to base it on. So that you have one set of rules in one state, another set in another state. This is not, back in the middle 1800s when all the states did anything they wanted to do. We're a national country that needs consistency across the board, and the voting rights should be consistent up to a certain point. So I just think that Chuck Schumer and Nancy Pelosi and the way they set this up and let Joe Manchin be their guy, the most conservative, and you say this all the time, he would be a moderate Republican.
Absolutely.
Back in the day.
That's what he is now.
Yeah, I think that's going to, I just think that sets up for me the great argument that you're going to hear in the midterms is, why should I vote in the midterms? Because if you don't vote, you may lose your right to vote next time they change some of these rules. It's going to be used as a rallying cry for them to come along. And the other thing I think, what about this though, Pete? What about them using this as more ammunition for getting rid of what's left of the filibuster? I mean, it's already gone for lower court judges, Supreme Court judges. I'm lost at why they're even holding on to this thing at this point in time, and why we don't have just pure majority rule. But I think they're going to use this to further attack and say this is why we need to get rid of the filibuster. What are your thoughts about that?
It's not gonna help them with us because going in from an independent Republican thinking point of view, we know that minorities don't get fired up during off-year non-presidential election. That's an established fact by any measure, any measure you want to use. I mean, it is what it is on paper. So you think I'm gonna worry about what Schumer and setting us up and all like that? It's sad for me to say, but it's true. African Americans don't get fired up to vote on national issues, and even sometimes within state legislators, if it's a non-presidential year, we just don't get fired up for it. And the other part of it too, we have to admit, whether we like to admit it out in public or not, when you look at some of the folks, black people like me and you, that's trying to advocate for improvement in voters' rights and all like that. You look at how long they've been in office. You look at some of the times when you don't see them out in the community. They're suspect. So I have to have a trust but verify attitude with them, not from what other people tell me, but what I actually see and don't see them doing in our community. So you add all that together. As a Republican, even if I'm a right-wing extremist, I'm going to smoke my cigar, maybe with Darrell Johnson, and we have a different opinion of views, and enjoy myself because it's not going to work. You talk to young people. There's an article in one of the national publications this week, Clint, that just came out Thursday or Friday, that talks about how young people use other reasons for not voting. Not interested, they the same, the whole bit. So do you think Mitch McConnell and those guys are worried? Now, I tell you the other piece of it that the Democrats don't want to come out, and they're lying to their constituency. There are a lot of Democrats that don't want to get rid of the filibuster, and then on top of that, you got a lot of Democrats aren't worried about any backlash from the black and brown communities. You know why? Because with the exception of some in New York and Minnesota, generally Democrats don't like to push out other Democrats. So there you have it. You add up the fact that young people are not going to vote. You add up the fact that the incumbent Democrats have been in there so long, and you add up the fact that in general we don't like to air our dirty laundry out in public. So as a Democrat like Schumer, somebody, I can sit there and fake it to make it, but knowing all the time I'm not really interested in because I want to hold on to power. And when you talk about the progressive black Democrat like the guy Bauman from out of New York, he talks about it. That's why they knocked off a couple of longtime Democratic incumbents, because they found out that they were shields and all. The only difference is African Americans in the Democratic Party do not hold others in the party accountable. Republicans, we do. What did Trump say as he go to Ohio today? He says, we're going to run primary candidates against the incumbent Republicans who have gotten off track. Do you think you have any knowledge where in Hillsborough County, where any black Democrat opponent coming in to knock off a black incumbent talk the same way? No, because we worry about what they're going to say in church and all. The hell with that. You got to vote for people who really going to take your interests at heart. And I'll turn it over to you, my brother.
That attacking of incumbents, though, it's a pseudo national strategy that Trump is employing. But rarely do you get it. Often incumbents, they don't run. I think that's what did in who's the senator before Tim Scott from Florida? Older white gentleman that not Tim Scott, but
Bill Nelson. Bill Nelson.
Bill Nelson. He got fat and lazy because he never had opposition. And so he got real opposition, he was in a pickle. I understand that now. But what role do you think this Georgia lawsuit is going to play in whether or not the federal government adopts a national voting rights bill? And what do you think about the chance of it succeeding?
Well, I think the feds will win the part of it against. I think eventually they're going to throw out making it a crime, giving people water. If in the Florida bill is something similar in Texas. So I think on some points like that, the courts will throw those out and narrow it down. But we're in a time now where states' rights have come on strong. South, out in the Midwest and the West. The problem is, as far as people of color, they don't look at how they can use state rights for a positive benefit. You hardly ever hear coalitions of African Americans and all talking about how to enhance state rights. I give you a perfect example. What always used to, I mean, it's sad to say, but it's what happened. Black person gets shot and all like that in the South or anywhere. But even in Florida and even in the Tampa Bay area, we would have black politicians and leaders say, oh, the federal government, we're going to turn it over to the FBI to investigate. Well, what happens when they turn it over to the U.S. attorney and the FBI investigate, they knew already before they came out publicly to put on this act that it was going to get buried. And so what, and to be honest with you, that's what happens. When people tell me we're going to ask the Justice Department to investigate, you think I get excited about that? Because I know they're not going. You know that. You're a lawyer. You know what time it is with that.
Well, listen.
I know we're going to be going to commercial soon, but
a Major League Baseball player, you just be striking out left and right today. I mean, Pete, you got to get your head. You completely missed this one. Listen, you didn't wonder why the lawsuit is in Georgia and not one of the other states?
They can't win it. They can't win it. It looks good because Georgia has been the most abusive one. But people forget, you have to look at the judges that appointed. When you look at the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeal or the 11th Circuit, which is I think is in Atlanta now, you look at the makeup of those judges and the new ones that they put on there during the Trump administration. You really think when you look at the makeup of those folks that they're going to rule in favor of the Justice Department? We're whistling in the dark, my brother. I'm just keeping it real.
But Pete, listen, and I know we got to go to break in a few minutes, but let me point this out. This lawsuit is not about winning in court. It's no irony that immediately after the voting bill kind of fizzles out in Congress, you get the announcement of this lawsuit. And it's in Georgia. Now, there are very few states that are synonymous with Black oppression more so than Georgia.
That's correct.
And so that's what they wanted. They could have picked the 5 other states who passed very similar rules and laws. But Georgia's synonymous with oppression of. I mean, it's like the ground zero. So I think the psychology of making this an election issue next year, and they're going to trickle out various hearings and announcements and things of that nature related to the fight. It looks like Biden's standing up for the Black voters in Georgia and under the similar rules. And based on that, I think it drives the motivation for people to get out. Now, I will say this. My perspective is the greatest advancements that African Americans have received have typically come from the federal level, where the states were being oppressive, the federal government rolls in and says, yeah, well, we're going to break some of this stuff up. So I think from that perspective, it was a knockout. It was a great strategy by the Biden administration. If they're coordinating, and he says he does it, the Justice Department does its own thing, but who believes that? And suddenly the media doesn't want to complain about that. But I just think that's why we got that in Georgia. Okay, Pete, so we got to go to break. And before we do that, I just want to say a couple of things. And I'm going to come back to some stuff I know that's on your mind. And the word you used was infrastructure, bait and switch. When we come back on the other side, we're going to get into some talk about the infrastructure bill. We're going to talk about Kamala Harris finally showed up at the border. And if there's that meeting thing, anything comes out of that. Also, Pete, you can tell us what your thoughts are about the ability of Senator Tim Scott, the great Black Republican from South Carolina, the senator, and his crime and his police bill. Also, get your thoughts on this. And what you're thinking about over the break is the appointment of none other than my friend Alec Hall to be the public defender for the Middle District of Florida in the federal Middle District of Florida.
That's the great thing for today.
That's some things on the table to talk about. Right. We're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we'll jump right in. This is In Touch News Radio, reality radio, where everybody can be a star. We'll be right back.
favorite old school. Today's R&B. With a smooth touch of jazz. You're listening to In Touch Radio.
Don't miss the first annual Amateur Grillers Cook-Off coming to the Tampa Bay area on Labor Day weekend, September the 5th. Hosted by the Dr. K.C. Patel High School, located at 10721 Rollison Ranch Road, right here in Tampa, from 11 a.m. to 5 p.m. There will be a $500 cash prize to the best amateur griller. If you feel that you've got the skills, then you need to bring your grill. It doesn't matter how big or how small. You can drive it up, push it up, pull it up, or even let grandma and grandpa help you set it up. Just bring the entire family out and enjoy some of the finest amateur grill meats. Sample the sauce and find out who has the best sauce. Bring your meat and put it on a plate, and let's see if you have what it takes. For vendors information, text 813-965-4456.
You're listening to Tampa Bay Tammy
Your girlfriend.
on In Touch Radio.
In Touch Radio.
All right, we're back live on Touch News Radio, reality radio where everybody can be a star. I've been reminded that, listen, while Pete, I love what you and I have to say about all the issues affecting us in our country and around the world. We do want to give our listeners a chance, if you want to join the discussion, to call in. The call-in number is 813-444-9588, 813-444-9588. Okay, so you can call in and join the discussion if you want to participate. That is where you can share. But we do appreciate you listening. And as always, I'm here in the morning. Can't do this by myself. I'm joined by none other than the great Pete Edwards, our co-host. Good morning again, Pete. How you feeling?
All right, with this melodious voice, I'm here with with this lady engineer and all that keeps me behaving correctly and everything.
Yeah. Listen, thank you, Anna. I appreciate you. Anna's our engineer, and while you hear myself and Pete talking, there's a team that keeps the operation working. Anna's back in the studio, and also, of course, DJ CEO Daryl Johnson, the owner of the station, does a great job putting together a top-notch professional program that we can be a part of. So I'm happy to be a part of that. But I threw that little teaser out there. I knew you'd nibble on that about Alec Hall. What are your thoughts about that? Let me just say this for everybody out there. So real quick, let me say this. So if you just don't know how this works, in the legal system, everybody's entitled to have a defense. And on the federal side, you've heard about the federal prosecutors. You hear about them all the time and their involvement with big cases and chasing Trump and all they are. Well, in Florida, we're divided in, and one of those is the Middle District of Florida. That is located in the central part of us, Tampa, and the call who's been for a couple of days was appointed by the 11th Circuit as the public defender for the Middle District. That's the federal court system. Your thought, and what are your thoughts about that appointment,
Let me
Pete?
tell you something. Alex is a good guy. Let me tell you what he should have been a federal judge or magistrate by now. I remember during the, I think, Obama administration, he went down to Orlando, which is part of the Middle District of Florida, to interview, I believe, for a magistrate position. He actually applied a couple of times for a judgeship in the state system. But what disappointed me is that the black legal community did not come out openly, even the black legislators, when he had a chance for a circuit judgeship or whatever, his name went up. But they send diversity names up, but a lot of times who's going to get it before they go up. But they've never rallied behind a hard-working brother. He's not flashy. He just puts the work in. And so I'm happy for him. I was pulling for him for that magistrate job and all, but it just shows you that we have a lot of work to do. Now, here's the thing. Biden is in there now. If if I was the so-called Black Democratic Party leadership in the state of Florida, a guy qualified for Alex like Alex is, I tell Biden and all his people, hey, listen, you forget about making him a black first black public defender over the Middle District. The man ought to be a federal judge. But we see the black Democrats don't hold the Democratic Party. Time Joe Biden got in, as he started making judicial appointments in Florida, even though they go through that screening committee they used to go to, Alex Hall should be at the top of the list of a black federal judge being appointed in the Middle District or whatever. But they won't do it. Now, I can tell you as a Republican, we don't, even in the statewide or whatever, and Trump proved it too. I think Trump only appointed 2 black judges across the country. But here's the thing. Statewide, he will never get a state judgeship, not from a Republican, because you know why? Number one, he's a public defender. Judges, like governors, don't like Republican governors. They don't like to appoint public defenders. They don't like to appoint moderates. They don't even like to appoint Republican moderate judges, and particularly if they're black. So that's just the reality of it. I don't like it. That's why we got to pull the Republican Party back in. But here's a man qualified that should have been, he reminds me of George Edgecombe. And I grew up with George. I was a little boy behind him, but I know him very well because we grew up in the same North Boulevard home. But here's a guy that what gets me is the Black Legislative Caucus has never statewide has really pushed, whether it was Rick Scott, the president governor, Jeb Bush did a little different, but this man should have been a state judge or a federal judge. So the question is, what Kathy Castro, what all of them going to do and say, hey, we're happy that and remember, Clint, the listening audience need to know that it was the federal judges appointed him. So, that's always political, more so than the president. But this man ought to be a federal district judge. He reminds me of Edgecombe, and he also reminds me of, and I know you've done work with him, you remember Judge Henry Adams, who's in senior status now, my brother? So it's like that. Clint? Can you hear me, Clint? So that's huh?
Yeah, the best thing about Alec, I think, is he is everybody's lawyer.
The man qualified. He's qualified, way qualified.
Absolutely. Now we understand though. Let's not make this out to be, Pete, the outside forces of the community are going to drive a Republican legislature and a Republican governor to appoint who they want them to appoint. Because we've gotten some people appointed to in Florida through Republican, but they have to come from the Republican side of the push has to come from the Republican side for that person. Now, interestingly though, here's Alec Hall being appointed at the 11th Circuit, the same circuit that will be hearing cases related to the voting rights issues and things of that nature, which I think is quite telling to me about its potential. But I was just really happy because he's an average guy.
Happy, man. I'm
public
so
school. Happy. I think he went to undergrad at Florida. I may be wrong about that. And then he's just built his career up in a great way. And I'm glad that he's getting finally the accolades that he deserves and that should be coming his way. And this may open the door for him to get to that federal position that may come down the pipe. But I thought it was a great thing. And like I said, great guy, young guy. Yeah. Oh, yeah. And I'm very happy for him to have gotten it. Now, to your other person that I know that you want to chit chat about this morning, the Republicans decided, they've got, one black Republican senator. Let's stick him out front and give him something that's almost impossible that we'll come back 20 years later and blame him for. And that is Tim Scott working on this policing reform act along with Cory Booker and Karen Bass. Now, they had a deadline that was coming up, and they've announced they've got a framework that they're going to be negotiating on. What are your thoughts about this potential police reform bill, and what does it mean for Tim Scott in the Republican Party?
Well, first of all, again, from a right wing extremist Republican point of view, Tim Scott knew in advance that they were setting him up to hang him out to dry. Number one. Now I'm serious when I say that. Because you got to look at the way who helped him get appointed to senator in the first place. Then secondly, he's up for re-election. So he's not going to do anything to the people from South Carolina, those Carolinians, the Republicans, they're going to make them think that he's a moderate or, God forbid, a moderate Democrat. So what he's doing, he's going to take the heat. No, you know why? Because he wants to get reelected for another 6 years. He wants to benefit from all of that. So unless they really do something with qualified immunity, Tim Scott knows already that, first of all, it's going to be a failure. Number two, he's not worrying about being put out there to dry and all, because he saw that when he took the doggone position in the beginning. And to show you the difference between how he's handling this. If, it used to be a song out, and Anna may remember this old school song. It used to be a song out, "Let Your Conscience Be Your Guide." Okay? And I forgot with the black lady singing this, but he doesn't have a conscience because he's put his political future ahead of everything else. If a black man, regardless of political label, cannot stand up and call out some of his fellow elected officials and all, when he knows up front that they're wrong, they're racist, or they're just biased as hell or whatever, Tim Scott is in the same position as Clarence Thomas. They both benefited. They both forgotten that they're black. He can say, "I've been stopped a lot of times," but when have you seen him come out against Republicans who have done stuff wrong on some of these bills they were trying to pass? He's not going to do that because he wants to personally benefit more than his constituents. And then on top of everything else, black people didn't put him in office, and he knows now that black people can't put him out of office. So I'm like Tim Scott. If I'm him, hey, bro, I love you, but guess what? Survival of the fittest. So that's why this bill's not going to make it. I mean, I feel sorry for Tim Scott in a way, because when it's all said and done, they're going to bury him black, and then he's going to leave a legacy behind. Here's a brother that could have been a good conservative black senator in the Republican Party, but he failed to call out privately or publicly any racist comments made by his colleague. And when you can't do that as a black man, you've already been compromised to your death. I'll leave it at that.
Well, I don't know about the calling out as his colleagues and all that stuff, Pete, because, when you're the only black person in anything, we've all been there.
Oh, yeah.
It's a tough road to hoe. When you're the only black person sitting there. All things black fall on your shoulders. All things black. I was at a law firm once that had they brought a young black lawyer. She was sharp. She lasted about a year, and she left the firm. And they decided they wanted to investigate, what happened with her leaving the firm. And, they came to me. And I said, look, we all are at this firm. We all know what happens here. And the question is, what are you going to do about it? Not what you want to investigate, what are you going to do about it? But I'm not going to be the scapegoat for you all to have me go look into this thing. I come out and say, oh, here are the issues for black folks here. Or worse, I come out and say, there are no issues for black folks here. But whatever it is, now that issue is hanging over me, and now I'm supposed to be expected to be part of the solution. So I get his difficulty of his position, and of course his desire to still want to go to family reunions. I get that whole deal. But I thought that it was interesting to me that he was placed in this position. And I always think it's weird when you have these politicians, and Republicans seem to do this better than Democrats. Every time he's on TV, he finishes with the campaign, call for funding. And you can go to timscott.com to support my fight for, police reform, whatever it may be. They seem to do this repeatedly, pulling in money and things of that nature. But I agree with the fact that it may be a setup. But my surprise was they announced there's a framework. Why would he not just go ahead and say, hey, look, these Democrats won't work with me. I tried, call it a day. But he's gone in and instead, I think now he's left the fruit hanging on the tree. And so people are expecting now something to happen. Like, for example, people are expecting something to happen on infrastructure. And I know you Republicans thought that was the case last week when everybody came out and said, we have a deal. Well, man, is that doggone Joe Biden slick. I really didn't see that coming. I was surprised to have that announcement come out. Everybody's nodding their heads and all excited. We have a deal on infrastructure. It's going to be bipartisan. And then Joe Biden strikes back. What were your thoughts when you heard Joe Biden, how he handled the Republicans on announcing the infrastructure bill? And now he's got them tied into, almost having to go along with his America plan.
Well, that's not going to happen. If I'm a senator, regardless, if I'm a Republican senator, I know already that number one, that the philosophy of the party is we're not going to push for the other part of that bill with all that they call infrastructure. That's not going to happen. I think what Joe did was just set up his own party for failure because the Democrats, they cannot unite on anything, especially when it comes to poor people and people of color. They just don't work like that. I think we got a call. Caller, you on this morning?
Hey, good morning. This is Robin. How you doing, Pete? How you doing, Clint?
Good morning, Robin. How you doing?
Lord have mercy, I'm trapped in the studio and by a phone call.
Go ahead, take care of that call, Pete. Go ahead, talk to Robin.
All right, Robin, go ahead. I love you, and I want our listening audience to know internationally, we agree more on things than people think. we really do.
And I'm calling to say, you know what, Pete? We normally, have a difference of opinion, but I agree with most of what you're saying this morning.
What?
I am calling in to say that.
In
regards to the Democratic Party and the tactics about, I think Clinton brought up something in regards to, he thought that the Democrats were setting a trap with the filibuster and other things. If it's their plan to go back to their communities to say, hey, they're doing this about voting, your voting rights, and black people don't vote anyhow, they don't care. So you go back to your communities or your districts and say, hey, this is what happened in D.C., and they're trying to take your voting rights away. People are not excited about voting as it is. So will that really bother black people?
Yeah.
Will it? Go ahead. I'm sorry.
You're right, Robert, and you've seen it. You've actually been a victim of it. You know what I'm saying? And that's why I tell folks all the time, good people in America, black and white, are just right of center. But we get crossed up. One of the reasons why I left the Democratic Party a long time ago, the black Democratic Party and the white Democratic Party were supposed to be together back then. But guess what? They didn't, particularly with black people, they didn't believe in training up young black candidates. What? You got to be 60 before we take a look at you. And I came out of a historic St. Paul AME church, civil rights downtown, the whole bit. But I could tell you, and he was a good mentor to me in a way, but the late Bob Saunders, who was a member of our church, his philosophy was if your butt was under 35, you wasn't ready to be anointed or even be trained to take over a black Democratic leadership role.
Yeah.
I'm telling you, and I told him to his face that, and I stand by that today, 30 years later, whatever, and it's still the same way. And Robin has recruited people, Clint, but she's been cut off by so-called white liberal Democrats, underfund her efforts and all like that, and been cut off by black Democrats who think you got to go through them 4 times before they sign off on maybe I'll interview this prospective black candidate under 35. You crazy. Ain't nobody going for that stuff.
Well, Pete, I would reuse the word cut off because I haven't been cut off by anybody.
Well,
they can say what they want.
Well, you know what I mean.
I go into the community. But if they want to attract something dealing with the black community, they really have to listen to the issues of the black community and know what the issues are and present that as a falter, not about voting. Because they, we vote. This is the conversation in the local community. We vote. We put you in office, and then we hear nothing, and it's silent. So with them, most blacks, or a lot of blacks, are saying, "Hey, you know what? We need a different party." So they need to really be truthful and honest and look at issues. They know what the issues are, and they need to move on those issues, present those issues, and then bring those issues back and say, hey, we've tried to do this, this, and this, and this won't work. They won't pass it.
Well, you get more respect, Robin. Clint knows that. We've all disagreed, but when you sincere in your presentation, you get more respect. And then you find out you can have better coalitions on issues that maximize the strength of a good coalition, even within the black community. But when you don't be honest and all, I mean, it's crazy. And when I talk to young people, and you're out there all the time knocking on doors and all, the first thing they tell you, forget about distrusting the white person. How about not trusting the black person that's supposed to be next door to us in our community? We don't see them either. So go figure.
Yeah, the message has to be different. They have to, the message has to be different, and they need to do something different. And they know this. People are saying this. Black people are saying this, and it's going to deaf ear. So I don't know what the midterm elections. The last election with the president, that was strictly based on. I mean, not based on hate, but both parties were spewing hate.
Right.
Hate Trump hate them. So they don't have that anymore. So what are they going to do about 2024? DeSantis, nobody running that's running in the Democratic Party right now, I don't foresee them beating DeSantis.
Yeah, he'll win by 6 more percentage points than he did the last time.
Yeah, so
he'll do that.
He's exciting his base, and by all means necessary, he's doing everything that he wants for his base, to excite his base. The Democrats don't do that. The Democrats do not do that. So that's my thought. But good show today.
All right, thank you, my dear. See, Clint. We got to know we got about 5 minutes, but that's what I talk about. At the end of the day, I learned politics when I was 8, 9 years old through Jetty B. Wild, Senior Dale Stewart, all those guys. After you have your Come to Jesus meeting inside your community, you have to come out, whether you're frowning or smiling or whatever, you have to come out on one accord, not for the benefit of you, but for the benefit of your community now and in the future. You look at some cities, they do it better. You look at Tampa, Florida, St. Petersburg, they do it better than Tampa, Florida. You look at Atlanta and some parts of Georgia, they do it better than other parts of Georgia. So it's a combination of how things work. If you look at Broward County, for an example, who's made the biggest distinct difference in Broward County, Kent? It wasn't black Americans per se as much as it was black Haitian Americans and stuff. You feel me on that?
Absolutely.
Okay,
I do. I thought I was going to be nice today. For the last, month or so, Pete, I've been having my way with you on the show, and I figured, somebody like Robin coming on and the two of y'all teaming up together this morning, it was just beautiful for me to hear y'all team up together and try to put me back in my place and point out how the Democrats may be missing the mark. I disagree. I think they're building blocks that are going to be great presentation to the community, that are going to be good for motivation to get the vote out and make the election much more competitive. But I think this infrastructure bill and how they're structuring it shows Joe Biden will fight. And the Republicans got more on their hands than I think they thought they would with this septuagenarian coming into office. And I think that the Democrats are going to be much better positioned on the issues that people care about when we get to the midterms. And the attitude of the Republicans is just going to fuel the opportunity and the willingness of the last remaining pieces of the filibuster to be gotten rid of. Pete, let me let you have the final comments, and then we'll close out.
Well, we enjoy these shows, our listeners throughout the world, and we ask you to participate more. Send in some letters, comments, what you think of the show, what we need to talk on. Call in sometime, more like Robin. I don't care whether you call from Fairbanks, Alaska, or wherever you listen to the show with the military, whatever. At the end of the day, I look at three things. How do we position our young people today that understand today's present situation, and yet you are the foundation reinforced to make a better tomorrow? How do we tell our senior citizens, you still have a role to contribute today? We want you to contribute today, but don't get it twisted. Don't put it all that you have to make the difference. Join in with the young people and those who are on the fence and make a difference for tomorrow.
Outstanding.
You know
Good
what
stuff.
I mean? And I'll leave it at that.
Thank you very much, Pete. Want to thank everybody for listening in this morning. This has been Straight Up the Middle on Intex News Radio, reality radio, where everybody can be a star. Stay tuned for The Sole Purpose coming up right next on this station. See you next week.